Dwarves, mountains, they go together like an axe and a gobbo's skull, like honey and mead, like slayers and mohawks. No matter what fantasy realm you're talking about, if dwarves exist, it's likely they came from and still live in the mountains, another Tolkien trope that hasn't yet been abandoned. In Warhammer, dwarves stick around their mountain holds like flies around rotting fruit. Sure, shake them up a bit and they might depart for a while, but they'll come back in time. But what if they didn't? The dwarves, I mean, not the flies. What if the dwarves decided that they'd had enough of not really seeing the sun and stepping on loose stones every time they woke up in the morning? What if the dwarves left their mountain holds? Greetings, ghouls and gals, and apologies for the delay in bringing this video out. Times are busy in my ghoulish den, but unless my master necromancer decides it's time for me to go back in the dirt, I shall be here to give you more Warhammer lore. Today, I'm almost certainly scoring myself a place in the Book of Grudges, as I'm asking what would happen if the dwarves were to leave their mountain holds. The dwarves, or Dowie of Warhammer's old world, are traditional to a fault. They worship their ancestors and believe that the best thing they can do is to live as they did. They are an honourable people tied to their homes by pretty much everything but an actual rope keeping them pinned there, which means it's going to be very hard to move them. In the canon timeline, the dwarves have been living in the mountains since Chaos first reared its ugly head. Leaving most of the bitter fighting to the lizardmen and elves, Grungni showed the dwarves they could be safe in the mountains. They would fight Chaos from their underground bases, but only to ensure their safety, as the dwarves didn't have the numbers to take on Chaos in a war of attrition. From then on, the dwarves have coveted the mountains as their own. They established hundreds of holds and made vast, affluent kingdoms thanks to all the natural resources they found in their mines. However, as we know, the glory of the dwarves wasn't to last. Thanks to a war with the elves, followed quickly by goblins rising up and destroying much of the dwarven infrastructure, the Dowie became a fragment of their former selves in the time of woes. Before the end times, they were still a proud race, but held a fraction of their former number. Their holds were mostly abandoned or taken over by their enemies, whether they be Skaven or Goblin, and while there were still plenty of prosperous holds, if we're being real, they were more like open tombs waiting for the dwarves to turn into corpses. Unless another faction like the Elves or Empire decided to give the dwarves a good deal of time and manpower, it's unlikely they would have ever succeeded in fully restoring their former glory. As I said though, today we're not just talking about the sorry state of the dwarves in the canon timeline. Instead, we're going to see what would happen to them if they look ahead and see their greener pastures might be the better option for them. The only question is, when would be the best time for the dwarves to leave their mountain homes? It wouldn't be as early as at the time of the Rise of Chaos, as they'd simply get wiped out by the demons invading the old world, nor do I really think the dwarves could leave during the time of Thorgrim Grudgebearer. The world's powers are too established at that point, and there wouldn't be anywhere for the dwarves to settle without invading somewhere, which I doubt is something they'd really be keen of, or even capable of. So we'll have to find somewhere in the middle, and I think there's not really much of a better place than at the beginning of the Goblin Wars. After a bloody conflict with the elves, the dwarves are still licking their wounds when hordes of greenskins suddenly appear to try and take their homes. For a time, it did look like this would be the end of the dwarves. It was a desperate era where so many holds were lost, so many grudges created. Dwarves are a stubborn people, but here I would say they would think about the future of their race. Cooler heads would argue that for the good of dwarven kind, they should abandon their holds and find somewhere that won't see tides of goblins trying to invade them at all times. I do believe some dwarves wouldn't heed these words. Older dwarves, longer in the beard, who would rather abandon their lives than their homes. They would hole up in the largest, most defensible settlements, Karaz, Akarak and the like, where they would make what they believe would be their last stands. In the canon timeline, of course, the dwarves managed to survive this onslaught with the help of the forces of man, but in this timeline, Sigmar and his tribes instead used their influence to welcome the sudden influx of dwarven refugees. There are so many dwarves that the humans believe the mountains have been completely overrun. As greenskins continue to plague the lands that would be known as the Empire as well, the fleeing dwarves pledge their axes to help bring an end to these hordes. And that they do. In this timeline, Sigmar manages to deal with the greenskins much more quickly thanks to a massive dwarven host coming to aid him. For their assistance, the dwarves are given land within the Empire to build their own cities and claim their own territory. Sigmar also does not wish for there to be a dwarf king and a human kingdom, instead offering them a place amongst his elect accounts. They accept, calling their new region Karakland, which is comprised of what would be Hochland alongside a strip of the north of Talabekland and much of Ostermark, giving the dwarves a natural border of their former home in the World's Edge Mountains. Also, they now have the formerly abandoned Middle Mountains in Hochland, a region they will not use for settlements, but can use to mine. I think even if we're removing the dwarves from their mountain holds, it would be difficult to remove them entirely from the culture that went along with that. Dwarves are meant to mine, and so they would gravitate towards places that they can do that, even if they aren't looking to take up permanent residencies in the nearby mountains. And so, the dwarves quickly settle into this new human and dwarf empire by defending themselves not only as hardy and trustworthy warriors, but brilliant labourers too. They are willing and able to travel to depths far greater than any man to obtain gems, minerals and more. This doesn't just extend to mining out the mountains of Karakland though. The dwarves would also seek to use their mining instincts on much of the natural world. I believe their natural obsessions with mining and digging would mean that when they're living surrounded by green, their initial thought would be to lop it all down. The dwarves would be your tree hugger's worst nightmare, as their engineers would devise new ways to tear up the forest and cut down trees, hoarding all the wood there is to get in Karakland so they can expand their wealth and position in the empire as a whole. Dwarves love hoarding, it's a simple fact, and it's a lot of the reason why they're so often unwilling to move to somewhere else. They've got generations worth of gold, weapons, armour, furniture and anything else you might inherit stockpiled in their vaults, and I can only imagine the absolute pain in the beard it would be to move all that stuff. Some of the escaping dwarves would have brought their own vault, or as much of it as they could carry, while others would have to start from scratch. Either way, a lot of the dwarves, once they move to Karakland, are going to have to build a wealth pile once more, but the ones who succeed in this new age for the dwarves are going to be the ones willing to part with it, at least momentarily. As the human practices of trade and business grow within the empire, you can be sure some of the forward-thinking dwarves are going to realise they could actually double the value of their hoard if they were willing to sell all the minerals and gold within it. Dwarves would quickly be established as the foremost traders in this altered empire, with their access to mountains, their natural instincts and ability to plunder natural resources to their advantage. I could easily see dwarves being seen as the best merchants around. Dwarf cities would be rich places, streets literally paved with gold, and towering monuments to their former glories. I think dwarves would adapt fairly well to this new life. Of course, dwarves can already be found within the Empire in the canon timeline, just far fewer of them, yet they're still seen as masterful craftsmen and blacksmiths. Now imagine an entire province of these people, with the dwarves supporting the Empire armies too, as well as supplying them with superior weaponry. I'd imagine the Empire would be considered much more consolidated when it comes to defence. Chaos, beastmen, orcs, they'd still cause issues, but I do think they'd cause less trouble, especially in the north and against the cities fortified by the dwarves. The dwarves, despite settling into lives as traders and labourers, would still need to do a lot of fighting, especially when they start to make dents in the deep forests of the Empire, when night goblin tribes and beastmen roam in their thousands. This will keep the dwarves hardy, perhaps not as tough as their mountain-dwelling ancestors, but still much, much tougher than the average human. It helps that humans are shorter living too, and that there are many more of them, as they can act as a front line. For once, dwarves might not actually be faced with a losing war of attrition, as humans could help add numbers to their armies. As we know from the canon timeline, whenever dwarves and humans team up, enemies of order usually have hell to pay. It all sounds pretty good, right? Especially for the dwarves. This is Warhammer we're talking about though, so it can't be all well all the time. On the human side, it begins to become clear that dwarves are quite literally just a bit better than them. Many are grateful for the dwarven support they've had as centuries go by, but there are always those looking to cause division. When the time comes for a new emperor to be elected, it appears as if there might be the first dwarven emperor in Warhammer, and yet his competition ensures that tensions rise to a boiling point. Pointing to the wealth of the dwarves, the way they use humans as fodder in wars, makes them easy to hate for a certain portion of the Empire population. There are conflicts in cities with shared dwarf and human populations, and the dwarf elector count pulls out of the election to save his people from being embroiled in a civil war. The younger dwarves, the ones who know their times in the mountains as distant legends, aren't happy to sit in an empire where they don't feel wanted. Instead, they begin to grow fond of the myths they've heard and wish to return to their kingdoms of old. A great pilgrimage risks the goblin-infested mountains to search for any redeemable settlements within them. I've not mentioned the greenskins much in this video, but I will say that invasions would likely hit Averland and Sylvania much more regularly. But with the sheer number of Skaven and greenskins in the World's Edge Mountains without the dwarves to constantly beat up, they would almost always be warring against each other, with rarely the time to venture to other kingdoms. Anyway, back to these young pilgrims. As they're exploring the old dwarven holds, they find rats, yes, goblins, of course, but when they return to Karaz-a-Karak, once sealed and now forced open, they find something truly shocking. Dwarves. Some that have been living for hundreds of years in the dark, others for much less time. These are remnants of the mountain hold dwarves, and they have all taken Slayer oaths. They live in scattered communities throughout the mountains, doing what they can to fight against the forces that have taken their home while honouring their ancestors as best they can. When word spreads that dwarves are still alive in the mountains, many feel great shame themselves at abandoning their kin, especially as they have been fighting so hard. A lot of dwarves in Karakland shave themselves and head to help the likely doomed effort to reclaim the mountains. Those that are still left are wealthy, still powerful, but their position then stands on a shaky pedestal as tensions with their neighbouring humans begin to rise once more. Will a dwarf emperor be crowned one day? Or will they all be forced to leave their empire homes because of human hate? We'll never find out because this is the end of the video. How do you think the dwarves would fare without their mountain holds? Where and when would you have them escape to? Let me know your thoughts on my timeline, any future what ifs, and anything else you've got on your mind in the comments below. I'll see you next time, but until then, have a good one, ghouls and gals.